Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment. We're going to be speaking with Dr. Dorry Segev. He's joining us here as Professor of Surgery and Epidemiology and Associate Vice Chair of Surgery at Johns Hopkins University. He's here to discuss the impact of COVID on the immunocompromised community and the importance of bringing new therapies to patients that supplement vaccines and provide long-lasting protection. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Segev.
Yeah, thanks. Great to talk to you.
Well, tell us a bit about yourself briefly and your role at Johns Hopkins University.
Sure. So I'm a transplant surgeon. So I operate on and take care of transplant patients who are immunosuppressed. And for the last 2 years since the pandemic began, I run a research group of about 100 people looking at various aspects of the transplant experience. And we have shifted all of our energy to understanding the pandemic and its impact on the immunocompromised. And so that's what I've spent the last 2 years of my life doing.
How have your patients been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, being immunocompromised, as you said?
So it's been a really frustrating and frightening 2 years for anybody who's immunocompromised, let alone transplant patients who are particularly immunosuppressed given the medications that they take. The first year before the vaccines, we knew that the risk of acquiring the disease was higher in people who are immunosuppressed. And if you got the disease, the implications of the disease, the severity was much higher because of the suppressed immune system. Then a year ago when the vaccines came out and everybody was celebrating that finally we had a hold on this pandemic, that was not the case for people who are immunocompromised. We discovered very early on that the immune responses in the immunocompromised to the vaccines were suboptimal at best. And so what that meant was that, for example, the standard 2-dose regimen of the vaccine was not providing enough protection for my transplant patients and other people who are similarly immunocompromised. We managed to convince FDA and CDC to provide third doses, but even then, for many people who are immunocompromised, the protection that they're able to get from vaccination is not anywhere close to what immunocompetent people with unaffected immune systems can get. And so still, even to this day, our ability to protect transplant patients and other similar people is much lower, and we are constantly struggling to find newer and better preventive and treatment strategies for them.
Now, when you say transplant patients and other immunocompromised patients, are we talking about the wide variety of transplants only, or are we talking about people who have not had a transplant but have other immunocompromising conditions?
Right. So there are sort of two dimensions of immunocompromise, right? One is that you have a disease specific to your immune cells. Mm-hmm. So like a B cell or a T cell malignancy or primary immunodeficiencies. And so there are a number of people who have those kind of conditions. And then there's this sort of secondary type of immunocompromise where you are taking medications to block your immune system on purpose. So if you have autoimmune disease, you're taking medications to block the flares that you get with autoimmune disease. If you have a solid organ transplant or a bone marrow transplant, you're taking medication to block your immune system from mounting a rejection. And for example, in the United States, it's estimated that there are about 5 to 7 million people with some sort of immunocompromising state that would make their response to a vaccine suboptimal.
So it seems to me that there would be a mad rush to develop some type of treatment, some type of compound vaccine specifically for the immunocompromised.
Right. And there have been a lot of different approaches to try to find protection for immunocompromised people, including additional doses, including some people reduce the immunosuppression medication that they take so that they can get a better vaccine response. But that's very dangerous in some people, for example, like transplant patients, because we wouldn't want them to get a rejection. The other option is passive immunity, meaning to give people directly the antibodies that they need to protect them rather than to expect their own immune system to create those antibodies for them. And that's been another really, really important approach in trying to achieve protection for these patients. And then if they get a COVID infection, to give them early treatment. But ideally, we don't even want to start down that road. We want to protect them before they even get the disease.
I understand there was a recent Provent phase 3 trial concerning Evusheld. Could you tell us what Evusheld is and how it's important in this discussion?
Right. So Evusheld is an example of the passive immunity through monoclonal antibodies. So monoclonal antibodies are pharmaceutically manufactured antibodies that can fight against the SARS-CoV-2 virus and prevent infection in individuals. And this is obviously a perfect potential prevention for those who are immunosuppressed who can't get a good vaccine response. So in a phase 3 trial of pre-exposure prophylaxis, meaning that people got the Evusheld prior to ever being exposed to SARS-CoV-2, there was a statistically significant reduction in the risk of developing symptomatic COVID compared to those who got placebo. And that's really important. That means that this was able to provide protection that in immunocompromised people, for example, a vaccine would not be able to do. And it's very exciting that that got a recent FDA emergency use authorization. So that is now becoming potentially available for immunocompromised people. There are what I suspect millions of people in the United States who've been waiting for this kind of passive immunity to get approved. And there's a tremendous amount of excitement, particularly in the transplant community, which is the community that I care for directly. It's a game changer for people who have been so frustrated and frightened by the fact that they tried to get vaccinated. Some have even gotten up to 5 doses of the vaccine and have had absolutely no detectable antibody response to it. And for those individuals, this is a complete game changer.
When it comes to the side effects of vaccines, if any, are there any noted in Evusheld?
There's nothing that has been worrisome to the transplant community and other immunocompromised communities right now that we're aware of. And so just like the vaccine is quite safe in these populations, all evidence points to Evusheld also being quite safe in these populations. And when as availability rolls out, I think there's going to be a lot of excitement in the immunocompromised communities to get protected with it. And as more people get it, we learn obviously more about the implications of getting it.
Well, Doctor, I appreciate you joining us here on Health Professional Radio for this brief conversation. Listeners, you can learn more at AstraZeneca.com. Thank you for your time, Doctor.
Great talking to you, and thanks for covering this important topic for our patients.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Dorry Segev. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.